Hey there, welcome to episode 72 of the FFS Talk audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. We're recording this at just after 11:30 in the morning on Thursday, April 10, 2025. Today we're going to speak about Recoding Abundance, which is actually the combination of two book titles. We'll get into that shortly. If you're not familiar with FFS Talk, the audio program about what works, what does not, and what we can do about it, or what we might do about it. The goal with FFS Talk is to engage in useful, productive conversation. So far, a conversation of one, but at least it's someone who is thoughtful, if I may say. Engage in those conversations, hopefully constructively, and ultimately come up with some ideas about what to do about what we think doesn't work by looking at what does. Focused probably more in the greater Vegas area, since that's where I am and that's where I spend a lot of time looking at these things. And as we will cover in today's episode, thinking locally and acting locally is sometimes a better idea, a little bit more realistic than trying to tackle top-down issues with something as vast and chaotic and complex as the federal government in the United States. But that's something we'll touch on today. So, by the way, if you're not familiar with the origin of FFS, which is used by other people, I didn't just make that up. It's based on an Irish expression, expressing frustration or consternation. If you are not familiar with what FFS stands for, you need to hang out with more Irish people, if you can. There are plenty. There are plenty of Irish people in the United States. Something like 12 times more. Is it 12 or 13 maybe? 13 times more people claiming Irish heritage in the United States than in Ireland. So you'll come across one or two now and then. FFS. Hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes. I'm going to fix one little typo right off the bat. Just a little date. I make a note of when I record and publish, so got to get that date correct. The show notes, which contain a summary, which I will read to you, and a few links for today's episode. 3 of them are the usual shameless self-promotion. I have one link for each of the books, and one link about suggestions that are not in one of the books, which I think they could have been alluded to, or there could have been more. Anyway, we'll get into that. So let us begin after I take a quick sip of water. That pause will probably be truncated, as in I truncate silence to keep the pauses tight. So if I do have to take a longer pause, I'm not sitting here thinking between words for 3 or 4 seconds, but if I take some water and it gets quiet for a moment, that will get cut out automatically. Anyway, let us begin. The summary of today's episode: 2 books about similar things. What does the future hold for the U.S.? That's us, and more importantly, perhaps, those of us who are still here. So the country as a whole, and then the people that are living here, like me, maybe you. When it comes to the structure and function of our communities and society, federally and locally, can we still do things? And if so, how? The links for today's episode: the Shameless Self-Promotion 3, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, DANHUGO. The profile page there has links to all of my audio programming, to my GitHub repositories for ongoing initiatives and whatnot, which are kind of relevant today, and some links, affiliate links to my favorite coffee beans that I get through Amazon. Sometimes I get them from elsewhere, but it's a quick list. A couple of other affiliate links, and right at the top of the profile, above the biographical information, is a link that you will also find here, a link to the Buy Me an Update weekly microcast, 5 minutes or less. So buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo/posts, POSTS. 5 minutes or less. We look back at the previous week's audio program topics, a sentence or two, and then any announcements and whatever's coming up for the week ahead, published on Mondays. So I believe we're coming up on episode 21 for next week. So check that out if you can. By the way, no obligation to spend any money at any of these places. I use them as customer engagement tools. My customer is my listener, my user in the case of any software projects or other things I'm working on. People out there, out and about in the world. I've had these for years. I'm in no danger of overfilling any bank accounts to exceed the FDIC insurance limit. So not to worry. But yeah, no obligation to spend any money. And then the third link, Ko-fi, I pronounce it Ko-fi to emphasize the unusual spelling, Ko, a hyphen or dash, the key next to the 0 on your normal keyboard, F-I, Ko-fi, coffee.com/Dan Hugo, DANHUGO. They do not host audio as Buy Me a Coffee does. They allow links to it, but they don't allow links to buymeacoffee.com. So, or they don't seem to support them. Anyway, I post a couple of text updates here and there, and both sites I can post photos or other such things. So I use them for that, sort of a out-of-band announcement and engagement set of tools. But again, no obligation to spend any money. If you would like to, any monies do go towards coffee, in case you were wondering. The first book, The Recoding in Recoding Abundance, Recoding America, has its own website, recodingamerica.us. I gotta figure out the best way to say S's like that so they don't peak. I actually have a pop filter in front of the microphone I've been using this whole time for all of the episodes of all of my audio programs. But the pop filter is good for pop filter, pop plosives, not as great for high pitch or high frequency S sounds. So still working on that, trying to tune the audio pickup versus noise rejection and so on. So bear with me. Anyway, recodingamerica.us. Check that out. The Abundance book, recently published. Recoding America is by Jennifer Polka. I'll get into her, I guess, about Jennifer Polka's background and why I picked up the book in the first place. The Abundance book is a Simon & Schuster publication. So Simon & Schuster website.com, SimonandSchuster.com is the website. /books/Ezra-Klein/9781668023488. Of course, that's why you should just click on the link as it appears in the show notes. The episode description, that is. Actually, it's a book by Ezra Klein from the New York Times and is it Derek Thompson from The Atlantic. So they're two journalists, whereas Jennifer Polka is an actual polymath, to be sure, but has actually worked on coding, worked on some of the bureaucratic challenges in different government agencies, and has been tied to digital services efforts and so on. So she's a little bit more vertically engaged in some of this stuff. The two journalists, Klein and Thompson, are more horizontal. I'll touch on that again later. The Abundance book was recently published. Recoding America, I think, is... I could probably just look real quick if I still have the tab open. There it is. Recoding America was published. Is it going to say when it was published? No. But there is a quote from Ezra Klein, which I'll touch on as well. Jennifer Polka has written one of the best policy books I have ever read. I don't know about that, but Ezra Klein, New York Times, also co-author of of the Abundance book that we are, of Abundance, of the book. That is the other half of the title. Yeah, doesn't have the publication information, but this website is copyright 2023, so it was over a year ago, to be sure. So that makes sense. So a little bit older book based on more specific and direct experiences, but two interesting books. I actually didn't care for the Recoding America book. Finally, suggestions for action, not in the Recoding America book, which is one of the problems that I have with the book, but at the recodingamerica.us/take-action page is a host of links and places to get started if you actually want to do something. So those are good. And we'll touch on that at the very end of the episode because, again, the theme of the FFS Talk audio program is what we can do about it. What works, what doesn't, what we can do about it. So there you go. The topic is bureaucracy. Both of these books are basically covering how difficult it is to get things done in the bureaucracy that is the daily operation of not only the federal government here in the United States, but of state and even local governments all around the U.S. Obviously, this is a topic of discussion in the current time. Again, 2023, the Trump second administration, with the advent especially, but not only, with the advent of the Department of Government Efficiency, which I will not pronounce in any other way than doggy. It's a pseudo-government agency, but who's even checking anymore? It's cutting haphazardly in an attempt to to not reuse the word, reduce government spending with substantial controversy. Strangely, this push towards efficiency without forethought might end up costing substantially more than the claimed savings. But the dust will need to settle before that reality comes to light. Before the net cost of the move fast and break things approach to government agency restructuring can be assessed, it is likely that we on the ground, so to speak, will feel, literally and figuratively, the effects of the various agencies, funding programs, and oversight, the regulations everybody seems to dislike until they realize that some of them are a really good idea. Basically, we are going to feel the effects before we know how much all of this is costing us financially and otherwise. First, some background on me. Well, second, I guess. I read Recoding America because its author, Jennifer Polka, is the original founder of Code for America. And I am the managing director, as I may have mentioned before, of Innovate for Vegas Foundation, formerly Code for Vegas, which was back then, when it was Code for Vegas initially, something like, I should know the date, but it's not totally material anymore given the state of affairs of Code for America and whatnot. But back when Code for Vegas was formed, it was just part of Code for America. It was before the Brigade program was formalized, and now more recently sunset, or as I like to say, rug pulled. But it would eventually be a Brigade if it had, I don't know if it shut down as a Brigade, but Code for Vegas took a little hiatus for a while, and we rebooted it in 2022. So something like 8 or 10 years later, I think 8 years later. Well, between the time it shut down and the time we restarted, I think it's about 8 years. Anyway, I did know that one of the co-founders of Code for Vegas was on our board of directors for Innovate for Vegas Foundation for 2 years. And we're coming up on our 3rd year. So there you go. According to the Code for Vegas co-founder, they were just a part of Code for America. And they actually played a proactive and substantial role in the formation of the open data program that City of Las Vegas still maintains today. Open data is a good thing, allegedly. I have been interested in local governments and since living in Sunnyvale during my 2nd tour in Silicon Valley. So from 2005 to 2013, I took the Leadership Sunnyvale classes. These are available in one form or another in many places, in many cities, and so on. There's a Leadership Las Vegas program, for example, which I looked into. It's very pricey, and I believe it's run by the Chamber of Commerce. The Leadership Sunnyvale program was an independent nonprofit organization, for what that's worth, which among other things presented, in the case of Leadership Sunnyvale, since I actually took the classes, presented in-person sessions learning how a city functions. So we would meet with different parts of the city staff, different agencies and organizations within the City of Sunnyvale government, the elected city council, of course, the mayor, and those staffers. So I think the program was a year, and it was 2 days a month. So a comfortable pace and very educational. The staff or the bureaucracy at small scale, it doesn't quite feel like that is the case, but it is. The staffers are the people who make things happen, and they face regulations. They can try to change some regulations on behalf of the public as directed by the elected officials, but also within their realm of responsibilities, and so on and so on. I actually highly recommend you, if you're curious about how your locality functions, if you're in a town or a city or a county that offers something like this, whether directly as a leadership insert name of city or as something similar where you can actually essentially learn how things work. Arguably invaluable if you are at the least bit curious. At this point, I believe, and it is my opinion, that it is nearly impossible to grasp the scope and grandeur of the federal bureaucracy, even though anyone who depends on any federal government services through its various agencies will likely feel some specific and identifiable pain if any of those services fail in some way. So get ready for that. Understanding really needs to start local. That's my opinion. Abundance takes a more big to small, the book Abundance takes a more big to small look at bureaucracy, and in fact references Recoding America as a hard read. And I will agree. So about these 2 books. This is not a book report, by the way, and as I will say later, I didn't go and reread Recoding America, and I did not read Abundance. with the intent of making this episode. I've just kind of a culmination of things in the news and things I'm working on, and having just finished the Abundance book, and the fact, well, I'll get into that. Anyway, this is not intended to be a book report. It's more about taking action, and you could read either or both of these books for some seed planting in your own consideration. So let me correct another typo here. I wanted to read this book, Recoding America, for the reasons given, that I am the managing director of what was at one point a part of Code for America. Jennifer Palka is the original founder of Code for America. She stepped aside or left Code for America the management role, like the leadership role. I don't know if she got completely out of it, but she moved on to pursue other things, including during the pandemic, participating in, she did digital services work with the federal government. There's a whole digital services endeavor, which I'm sure 18F was a part of and is maybe no longer a part of, but that's for another day. She was directly involved with dealing with the lack of functionality in the unemployment program management, as in the tools, the software, the processes, and so on, in the state of California. And so I believe that's correct. Florida probably made the news more so, but California, with a larger population, probably had a more substantial issue to deal with. Either way, the book details some of the chaos she's encountered at big levels, and it does focus more on federal government programs. But certainly Jennifer Palka has been hands-on with some of the shortcomings to be found particularly in the tech implementations of our various agencies and organizations within the federal bureaucracy, and then in the state level as well. So Recoding, in the book title, even suggests, or it has the RE in Recoding, in square brackets. Now, in the coding world, in the nerd class, in the class in which I find myself, we would view the square brackets as coding or possibly recoding. So re being like an optional addition or prefix. So the take home, I was hoping it was as the title implies, a treatise on how to move forward, on what to do about the current state of affairs. And given the fact that she had founded founded Code for America, I'm sure there were more people involved, of course. In my mind, it was going to be, here's how we recode America. Here's some things to do based on what we know. Like, here's a list of problems that we have to solve, bugs, if you like. But this was not the case. Unfortunately for me, I bought the hype. People were very excited about the book. I read you the Ezra Klein quote that is on the Recoding America website, but I found that this was a book of lamentations. Lamentations are fine. This is not awful. There is something to be learned looking at what is not working. But much like this audio program, it's always good to look at what does work and what doesn't, and then what we do about it. It was that third part that was, the book was extremely light on suggestions. And as we'll find at the end of this audio program, and as I referenced in the links, there are resources on the website. There was very little spent on the action step within the book, and I would have liked to see more of that. So if you look at the book plus the website content, there is some value here to know the motivation behind some of the suggestions, the things that do need to be fixed, or the things that are lacking or that have fallen behind, or however you want to look at it. But I would have liked to see, because it's not so often that people will, the same is true of movies. If a movie requires you to also read the comic book and visit the website and go to a convention, the movie can't stand on its own. So I think on its own, the Recoding America book could have done a better job at the recoding part. That's my opinion. The here is what I learned through all of this and what we could do moving forward part was sort of there at the end of the book. But honestly, I was really hoping for more. It was more, I would have liked to see a problem solution flow, like here's what we encountered and here's what we could do about it, or the specific things that need to change and the reasons they are hard to do. So there was a lot more of it's hard to fix these things, but there wasn't quite so much, here are some specific things that we could do that might make it easier. I mean, It was not a hopeful, optimistic book, I guess you could say. The website has a little bit more optimism in some of those resources. And as Ezra Klein points out in abundance, as I will say later, he refers to the Recoding America book as a hard read, and I agree. Yes, there is value in recounting experiences from being in the proverbial trenches, but for me, those lamentations were, well, if there were bugs, if each of them were bugs filed in a bug database, a lot of these would be marked as duplicates. So it was kind of restating some of the core issues with a bureaucracy that is growing in complexity from the outside observer and complication internally, which we'll get into again later as well. This is maybe a harsh assessment, but I think there would have been more value in presenting a specific failure mode, something that needs to be improved, addressed, or maybe even implemented if it isn't already, with a practical example of where this need is found. Like, we need to reduce tech debt, for example. Code written in COBOL that lacks any substantial active developer community and workforce, other than perhaps the people the government retains and probably spends pretty good money for. And we saw this in these systems that were implemented in COBOL, but which were not maintainable or even repairable in any reasonable way when the COBOL-based unemployment payment and processing systems, a system in California, but systems in several places, were failing. So this is a great example of, well, here's a problem, but here's what we really need to do, with a very practical example. And because so many people were impacted by unemployment and other support payments and social safety nets in general during the pandemic lockdown timeframe, and so many people are impacted by Social Security payments and that system working, which is making the news often as I'm recording this. And of course, the way the IRS functions, it would be nice if people had a better view into what the cause of some of the fragility is. Often the systems work well enough so that the fragility is hidden. We don't always know just how close to the edge some of these systems are. Obviously, the lockdowns and the social safety net programs that became essential during the lockdown for the pandemic did show some of those weaknesses, and the fixes they turn out to be more complicated than people might hope. And there's a lot of, I didn't even know it was that broken, but that doesn't help me when when I need these things. So I think the Recoding America book was lacking in there. But again, check out the website resources linked in this very episode and see what you think about those. The Abundance book. This is a newly released book just out in March of 2025. I think I got it like maybe 7 to 10 days after it was officially out and released for purchase. It covers a lot of very current matters, but it also covers some things that we all remember, or which some of us might. There was real attention paid to the high-speed rail program that is still mired in bureaucracy in California. And I will interject here. I'll interrupt myself if you don't mind. When I lived in Sunnyvale, California, one of the plans was to make use of an existing rail that was running down the peninsula. So it would be, what was it? The King something. Townsend, Kingston. Is it Kingston? It's been a while. The train station in San Francisco, the end of the line for the Caltrain route, actually has some, they share the rail with Amtrak or other cargo trains. So every once in a while, and I happen to live on the rails. Where I was living, there was an easement, and it was the rail, the actual trains were in the backyard, right, just on the other side of the fence. So I knew exactly when the train was arriving. You could very clearly hear that. So when high-speed rail was becoming more and more of a possibility, maybe not a probability, one of the plans was to have the high-speed rail trains run on those tracks. And so there was community outreach for public comments and question and answer and so on. So I attended those meetings. Total mess. The numbers that they were sharing were not realistic. I asked actual pointed questions about some of their ridership estimates and so on, and the people in the question and answer couldn't answer. So it was just basically going through some motions. These programs are still not implemented. So we're talking, this was me in this meeting probably, I'm going to say 20 years ago, maybe. Let's call it 15, but it could be as many as 20 years ago. Probably like 16 or 17 years ago. There's still no high-speed rail, certainly not running through Sunnyvale. So the bureaucracy is slowing these things down. They make a comparison to China, which I believe, going from memory, has laid 23,000 miles of high-speed rail across the entire country. And California has yet to get this program running after decades, all told from initial concept when Governor Jerry Brown was in office, and then not a lot has happened since. Housing regulations that slow any notion of addressing housing shortages in California, especially low-cost housing, to the point where hope is all but lost without private funding and so much independence as possible. As much independence as possible from government workflows. So the government bureaucracy debate, various reports and regulatory inspections and limitations and so on are arguably slowing things down, whether it's something like high-speed rail, which probably has good use cases, but when they were really pushing it, it was, now you don't have to fly. But, our airports are taxed and they're burdened by passenger flow, and short commuter flights could be replaced by this high-speed rail. But I actually knew someone that was like a public affairs person for the San Jose airport. So he answered directly. He said, no, the airports are 75, 80% capacity during busy travel times. And so they're not consistently at the higher levels like that. But they have headroom. There's no urgent need so far. Will this change over the next 10, 20 years? Which doesn't matter at this point. But it could. But it really, they've been holding at these rates for so long that it's unclear that there's an urgent need. So the high-speed rail case was tricky, and it was only going up in price. A budget set 20 years ago is going to be slightly higher in today's money, and with today's issues and additional bureaucracy resting atop the tired shoulders of that giant. There is also focus on specific programs in the book, like Warp Speed and its success delivering a working vaccine in 10 months instead of 10 years, as many people would have expected. Various government-funded research programs that yield substantial success and useful outcomes, and regulatory agencies that have good intentions, but probably slow progress way too much. Most things start out with the best of intentions, and then they get mired in political debate and whataboutism and feature creep. All manner of bugs can creep into the feature list. Like Recoding America, this is something of a book of lamentations, but there are some who view co-authors Klein and Thompson advocating too strongly for deregulation. I myself view this as a collection of ideas to tackle some complications that are slowing progress. Ideas are good. Maybe there is advocacy here. I believe Klein, who I'm more familiar with, but not too much more, I think he may be advocating a little bit as a reporter or journalist who has talked to a lot of people. So you're going to start coming away with views, opinions based on all of these conversations and the reporting and the investigation component of the job. Journalists are often talking to a lot of people about detailed views and opinions and data and possibilities and so on. So I think it's more likely that they are advocates by association based on what they've learned over the years and their reporting and their writing and so on. I didn't get a sense that they are ready to run for office and make these things happen, but there are more horizontally derived views. They're more cutting across different industry, different like medical research and housing construction and transportation projects and so on. So they're covering a lot of different areas, whereas the Recoding America book is based more on personal experience and more on vertical tech-related issues. Not that they're all the same exact issue, but much more in the technical implementation realm. Abundance is really more about policy and maybe even some culture, political influence and expectations and so on. So I think both together probably fit together nicely if you're considering reading one of these I think both go together well. Although, again, I was not a fan of Recoding America because I kind of felt a little bit let down. If you combine it with the website, I think it makes a better case for what it is. So keep that in mind. So this is my hand waving. You know what that is? Hand waving is when you try to make a case by just continuously talking and gyrating until people stop asking you questions. Now, I did not read these two books. Recoding America was a year ago and Abundance was 2 weeks ago now. I did not read these two books with a mind to produce this episode. If I did, I would have read them again. I would have read Recoding America again. However, in the context of the chaos in which we find ourselves here in the U.S. of late, and especially with the mentions of Jennifer Polka's work with government agencies and authoring the book about these adventures in the Abundance book by Ezra Klein, and he did actually interview Jennifer Polka on one of his New York Times podcasts. I don't know if he has multiple. I think it seems like he does. But I did not listen to that interview. I might go and track it down. It occurred to me that these are the sorts of things people talk about all the time, myself included, yet there is still no clear path forward. Perhaps this is rooted in the ever-widening gap between the Democratic Party and their MAGA counterparts and whatever remains of the Republican Party somewhere in there. But also, does anyone know what is going on anymore at all? Has complexity taken over complication? And I will remind anyone who's not listened to this audio program before, or me in general, complication is something that it could be many steps, could require rare materials, difficult processes, certain pieces of knowledge, certain equipment, and so on, but it can be done in a clear, maybe even transparent way. So like, ooh, that's complicated, but it's doable and understandable. Complexity in this standard sort of normal use of these two terms. Complexity is we're not exactly sure how it works. Maybe it seems to do this, and the economy is complex, and the three-body problem is complex, and weather is complex. These are things that you can do maybe a correlation, but causality maybe is not quite clear. You know, you can't do a reproducible recipe for something that's complex. You can adjust an interest rate and watch the economy change and say, okay, that's what we expected. So complex systems are much more difficult to predict, to describe, to reproduce. So there you go. If I were going to plan for this episode, I would have reread Recoding America, and I would have read with more intention the Abundance book. I did not really enjoy Recoding America, as I've said, again, because I was really hoping for more suggestions about, well, Recoding America, given that the context of the book and Jennifer Polka's experiences tend to be in the software tools and methods and implementations involved with government bureaucracy, the various government programs and agencies, and especially even customer-facing tools. But not always. Sometimes they're just systems like IRS and Social Security and unemployment person databases and payment databases and how everything is allegedly working. And then when it doesn't, what happens and so on. So Recoding America is definitely a lamentation about implementation, but I would have liked to see more suggestions, as I've already said. Abundance feels more like journalists collecting what they have come across in their investigations and writings, making a case based on their observations, more for their own take on possibilities than outright advocacy. Now, I'm not saying they're not advocating, but I'm also not saying that this was not a book designed as a call to action. It's really more of a, hey, we should really be thinking a lot more about these things and what we could be doing differently. So yeah, if it was a call to action, it was, hey, start paying attention more because things could be better. And they used to be better, arguably. But again, I would read over both of these again if this were actually a compare and contrast books report. It isn't, or it wasn't intended to be, but the take home from these two books, and there are other books along these lines. So these aren't even the only two, but I happen to have read them. What I do think is, what I do think is interesting, though, is that these two books, probably two of many, like I just said, I really should stop getting ahead of myself. I've written these things down so I don't forget. They're probably two of many books along these lines, are shining some light on what is, again, a system of systems that is becoming complex where it wasn't already, such that it is getting in its own way and offering diminishing returns on what is generally a federal budget that exceeds any concept of most normal people, that most normal people can hold in their minds to ponder. That is, these big numbers, trillions of dollars, normal people just have no concept of what $1 trillion is, right? And if we're going to spend another $1 trillion more than last year, that's beyond comprehension for the casual observer. What is Trump? And my favorite is when some will report on stories, they will, maybe the number is 1.7 trillion, and they'll say another $2 trillion. They'll round up, because when you only think of 1.7, you think, oh, 2, that's only an additional 0.3, but that's a lot of billions of dollars. And so when someone rounds that number, they're really disingenuously throwing away some of the details, because 1.7, 2.0, what's the difference? A lot, like $300 billion, which is also an immense number. So the way that people manage, talk about, discuss, report on these massive quantities can be a little bit misleading, or maybe it softens the blow a little bit, or increases the distance between the general public and these vastly expensive things, these huge amounts of money. No, doggy is not a good idea. The move fast and break things approach will ultimately break things in bad ways and worse. But a serious look at what works and what does not is absolutely worth not only the look, but some planning and some action in a reasoned and responsible way, which I would have been all for. In fact, there have been efforts, I think the Clinton administration and probably Reagan, Reagan was anti-big government anyway, but that darn trickle-down economics notion, almost as broken as this tariff notion today. But there have been efforts to streamline government and so on, and they don't always work. Too many cooks in the kitchen sometimes, maybe. So we run into what in my industry is called technical debt, but also kicking the can is another expression that's more general. So yeah, we have that term, perhaps you've heard it, tech debt, which is heard it before, I just said it. Basically the stuff in a technology product or service that really should be done better, should account for more failure mode, should take security a bit more seriously, or any of a variety of ideas along these lines, but they are left for later, for someone else to address, or when the debt becomes apparent in bad or catastrophic ways, for someone else to deal with, like as a fire drill, right? Like, oh no, everybody's IRS records have been leaked to a South African dude who should never have been touching or messing with these things. So I'll tell you my real world Silicon Valley experience. This is something that I learned early on, which I think is problematic, is this. I was working for a produce company in Cupertino, California, and they wanted to release a new product. Several products were tied to the release of this product. It was a product that had received a lot of press, and it had a lot of expectation, marketplace expectation. As a public company, there would probably be impact on investors and value of the company and so on. So very late in the game, and again, I was working there at this produce company, very late in the game, as the launch day, the big release and the big news marketing program, announcements and talking about it and stuff, so on and so on. Stuff. Who says stuff anymore? Suddenly there were issues. There were actual, like, ooh, why didn't we catch this sooner? And it turns out I think it was a last minute reconsideration. Are the problems you're finding data loss? Data loss was considered a showstopper. If something bad happens and our customers lose their data, if it corrupts their hard drive, if it mistakenly deletes files, if they lose their pictures and their videos of their kids, and these are unacceptable. So are these problems you have found showstopper data loss issues? No? Okay, we will move the problems you have found to the point release, and we will release on schedule. So there you go. So rather than releasing a fixable, higher quality product, like, we can fix these things, but it would delay release by 2 weeks, maybe 4. But no, unacceptable. So we have to launch the product with known problems And we will begin fixing them now in parallel. That's the magic of project management, program management. We'll begin on the point release before we ship the product, so that, version X.1 will come out 2 to 4 weeks after we launch, and everything will be fine. So the tech debt gets moved forward into the point release. Like, oh, we have these problems. We know about these problems. And of course, the problems you don't know about, those are a little bit worse. So, we really should fix that one bug, but not fixing it actually has 2 bugs hiding behind it. So that's another form of tech debt. So when you put these things off, they become debt on the books for your product into the future, and they become somebody else's problem. And this is how the world works. So sorry to break that news to you. The take-home message in Recoding America is that tech debt is a huge problem that needs to be reconciled. In abundance and in Recoding America, there is a larger issue that is similar but far more impactful than mere tech debt. And we have another useful term here. It's called code smells. It's a real term. These are code products, the outcome of work done by developers and other contributors to some project. Could be pure software, could be the software running in hardware, could be software running in a car or an airplane. I think some of those have made the news over the years, that have issues that could and should be re-examined for improvement, but which are sometimes too fragile to actually do. Tech debt couples with code smells, and it makes for some problematic technology. If we extend that to government, we get huge complex systems that should be streamlined, optimized, or maybe at least updated, but which are so fragile with so many layers of fixes and policy changes and appeasement and whatnot. So many code smells that have turned into technical debt for so long that there is no clear path to fixing without most likely breaking. Doggy has taken an approach that ignores the downsides of breaking. That is, move fast and break things. Yeah, so we'll deal with it later if we break it. Though it remains to be seen if anything they have done is doing any of the fixing. So if you actually take the time to fix things in a useful way, in the correct way, with air quotes around that, then you hope that you don't break things. But if you enter the transaction believing that breaking things is just as fine as anything else in our goal to make things more efficient, ultimately there will be a cost associated with that. That's, live edits on websites are, if no one has learned from that example, and if you have never done that for a website, if you've never edited a page that people are viewing live and then had massive problems, hey, the website stopped working. Oh, I left out an angle bracket. Whoopsie. Those are real things. The IRS or Social Security systems might be good examples where all of these converge with the services like customer support, issues of both being left to chance with layoffs that may complicate the stable operation of both the IRS and Social Security. On the customer side, so basically laying people off, but also changing systems, there won't be anybody ready to deal with problems from the customer side. They'll call and they'll get a busy signal or go to voicemail or this number has been disconnected, instilling confidence. So we're going to remove the interface for humans and we're going to break the underlying system by trying to quote unquote fix it. And then we'll just hope for the best, shrug the shoulders and figure out a point release. So there's all kinds of things that could go wrong here. And anybody who's in tech knows that. So if we couple the service side, the human factor, the interface, the customer support, the phone, email, even website information, service locations that people can visit in person, then we couple that with old COBOL code from decades ago that probably works, that has probably been patched and updated in place to address issues as they've been encountered over the years. And maybe they had to implement policy changes and so on, like tax rates or cutoff ages, retirement ages, when Social Security benefits can begin, all these things. They've adjusted over time, and it might be based on birthdays or grandfathering in people. There's probably a lot of logic that goes through to implement political policies as codification of these things, codifying. You'll hear that word sometimes. So there's a dwindling population of COBOL programmers or COBOL-capable programmers, developers, available to fix, much less migrate to modern technology. So if you have no idea what COBOL is, that's the common business-oriented language, if I recall correctly. you may not be able to fix it, and you certainly aren't going to be adept at capturing all the nuances to migrate to something like JavaScript. Let's hope not. Fixing code smells gets harder and harder, because if you don't know COBOL, you don't know where this could be done a little bit better, or this looks like something that they left to fix sometime in the future, and then they never got around to it, and that's causing other problems and so on. So those code smells can lead to that tech debt building up faster than some might understand, and then fewer and fewer people actually understand enough the functionality and implementation, and the complication only grows towards complexity. So what was something that COBOL programmers wrote and kind of understood then became more and more complicated, but there's still people around who understand it and who could probably fix it. And as that population continues to shrink over time, unless you're learning COBOL right now, which maybe you should think about that, you have fewer and fewer people who are able to step in and say, oh, I think I understand what's happening here. They might have to step in and say, I don't know how this works. I'm going to have to roll up my sleeves and figure that out. Or even worse, I don't care how it works. I'm just going to rewrite it. So if the tech fails, if there are fewer people to answer questions, well, I can't think of a better, more perfect, and more efficient system than that. Yipes. What about here at home? Sometimes literally. So federal bureaucracy often operates somewhere out there, like beyond the horizon. We don't really think about it much day to day. And we discover its issues at the worst moments, like when a check or food or aid items fail to arrive, or some other services do not materialize, or even worse, when you get highly politicized speech making accusations about the way some emergency management agency functions or does not. I should also point out that I'm a CERT volunteer, so I've gone through various trainings, generally top level, not top level, but like 50,000 foot view on how emergency response works in the time of a crisis and so on. So it was painful to watch some of the accusations, some of the finger pointing during the political campaigns of 2024, more so from one party than the other. But either way, when things break down, when they legitimately don't work as one would hope or expect, that's when the alarm bells begin to sound. Otherwise, things move along, and for the most part, unless you're in a business of food, agriculture, energy, or any other more closely regulated industry where you face inspections and other checks to measure your safety, security, and so on, you probably are just generally not paying attention. You're doing your thing. You're not worrying about them doing their thing. That's it. But sometimes this comes home, illustrated in one example by comedian and TV presenter Bill Maher, who has recently been lamenting his own experiences getting a roof upgraded on his home in the LA area, facing 2 inspections for just a roof repair, roof upgrade, whatever he was doing. 2 inspections that took too long for him. He was very frustrated. They did not take place in a timely manner, and he was upset, and he has a platform to share his frustration. So he has. His frustrations are not unreasonable, but his belief is that his roof on his house should be his problem. Why all this attention to detail? He even brought it up with California Governor Gavin Newsom as a guest on his HBO show, Real Time with Bill Maher. I think it was the April 5 episode. It was either at the end of March or the beginning of April. April 4, Friday, April 4th. You can find it if you're really curious. Gavin Newsom is the guest at the beginning of the show, so it's in the first 20 minutes. If you are interested, you can hear him talking about that. And he talked about it in a previous episode as well. Gavin Newsom actually agrees that the bureaucracy of home inspection does make things more complicated. It slows things down. They're also detailed more generally in the Abundance book, where they go into why housing programs take so long and are often out of budget and out of time by the time they actually enter the realm of possibility. The problem, the origin of inspections, is about safety for not only the person living there, as is Bill Maher's assertion, but for the next buyer, neighbors. Like, what if your roof blows off in a good wind? And let's not forget firefighters, who actually benefit from having properly constructed and inspected roofs that meet code and that will support the weight as indicated, and so that they're not climbing onto a roof to fight a fire and to possibly save lives, only to find that the roof blows off in a good wind or possibly allows them to fall through it. So there are multiple reasons to have well-constructed roofs on top of homes, and to do that expeditiously. Unfortunately, the process has become complicated, and even to the point of being complex if you have no idea why, like, this takes so long, it's inconvenient for me. That's complex to the customer, the user, the person owning the home. But the staffing is short, the timelines and fees and frustrations become palpable, and the subject of discussion without that root context. Why are they causing me inconvenience is not the goal, but it is unfortunately one of the outcomes. I myself have been impacted by odd bureaucratic decisions around the safety of over-the-counter sinus medications based on pseudoephedrine, or pseudoephedrine, however you would like to pronounce that. Now, I don't want to pull up the details. I'm going to go with what we think we know, because most people probably don't have any idea. I think it was an athlete, maybe a baseball player, at some point had a deadly reaction to use of medications that contained pseudoephedrine or pseudoephedrine. And this, coupled with allegedly rampant use of bulk purchased allergy medications, that is, someone would go into a pharmacy, a grocery store, and say, "Ooh, give me all of your pseudoephedrine, give me all your Sufadrine, the generic, give me all your Sudafed, the commercial version, a commercial version." They may be going in there and purchasing it all to make something that you may have heard called crank. It's a street drug made in a bathtub or in a bucket or something, not under the most medically sound conditions. So it turns into a controlled substance, turns a medication into a controlled substance. So I can still purchase over the counter. I don't need a prescription to get pseudoephedrine, but I must now show an ID to couple my purchase with my identity to make sure I don't purchase too much too often. Is this effective? Is the reasoning sound? Maybe it is. I don't know. Like roofs, there's probably some good intention there that grows into an implementation of policy that makes less sense to the end user, and which may cause unnecessary inconvenience to achieve some noble goal. And then it may never improve. It will just be stuck like that. And I will say I've run into circumstances, especially when I was traveling, where I was going to be out of the country, for weeks at a time. And I would say, and you never know what the pollens and other particulates in the air might be. So I used to try to keep some Sufadrine, the generic, in my luggage, so that it would be available if I needed to, if I was having trouble breathing, of course. And for me, Sufadrine was reasonably effective for even 24 hours at a time. So there is a less regulated, as in you can just buy it without the ID, and it's not as effective, and in fact, arguably ineffective. And I think it's been deemed ineffective. I cannot remember it's HCl. So it's a hydrochloride variant, which is not pseudoephedrine, but it's something else. Since we're here, I will try to remember what that is. Pseudo alternative. What is this? No, they're not showing it. Well, either way, is it phenylephrine? Phenylephrine? Oh yeah, phenylephrine. Anyway, I've had some long pauses in here, so those will get truncated out. But sorry for the distraction. So phenylephrine, Sudafed SCE. I believe there's a HCl in there somewhere for if you do some of the reading. Either way, there is this alternative. It's not as effective, and I believe it has been deemed ineffective. So when I was traveling, if I wanted to stock up, so to speak, get one extra package of Sufadrine, they would say, "Oh, you purchased it less than 30 days ago, so you're not allowed to buy it." And I would say, "Well, but I'm leaving the country, so I wanted to have an unopened box too, just in case somebody has a problem. If I'm passing through security and they say, 'Hey, what's this?' But I couldn't get it." So are these policies and the implementation of these protections completely valid? Are they well thought out? Could there be a way to maybe revisit these and say, you know what? There are things that people are buying that are far worse than Sufadrine. Is it really appearing in street drugs like crank, a fake, what do they call it? Like biker speed or something? Street speed, something. Crank is supposed to be, I got to be honest. If you just take pseudoephedrine, if you take enough of that by itself, you'll probably stay up all night. So do what you like. But the fact is, this might be something that's never revisited, or makes personal health, personal sinus management that much more complicated or complex if you're not paying attention. When does it really need to be? Same with the roof, right? There's a reason for having the roof inspections, but life becomes more complicated or even complex for those who do not take the time to figure out exactly why and simply say, this is not fair. This is my house. It shouldn't matter to anyone but me. What's going on with my roof? It shouldn't matter what's going on with my sinus medication either. So sometimes some clarity or some transparency could go a long way in helping people understand what's going on, or to offer up a pathway that someone else might consider, hey, you know what, now that I know the reasoning behind this, what about, there are plenty of good ideas out there. You never know. So what to do? We're coming to the end of this episode, I promise. There's almost no possibility that any one person will grasp the vastness of the federal bureaucracy. As I've said in general and in other episodes of various productions, there can be complication from an insider perspective that appears as complexity to the casual observer on the outside. I cannot imagine that this is better illustrated than in the federal bureaucracy. I would suspect that people in one agency or organization, if you just take the IRS, the Social Security Administration, the Social Security Administration is surely complicated from the perspective of someone in the IRS and vice versa. And it might even be complex. They may not have any idea really how these things work. Although in these two cases, they're dealing with massive fractions of the population, and they're dealing with massive inflows inflows and outflows for both. So FICA and so on. So it's more possible that with agencies and organizations that are more distal, that there's absolutely no understanding and that everything's complex, right? Like, how does the Parks and Recreation part of the Department of the Interior, or I think that's Department of Interior or Department of Agriculture. I think it's Interior. How does that work according to someone in the Department of Energy? That might be completely foreign. Probably is. So one might consider, we're just starting here. So what to do? One might consider examining the way the world works closer to home, as in local government in your city or town, or maybe your county. Here in Vegas, Clark County, there's a lot of unincorporated areas of Clark County. So you really don't have a town. You don't have a city council or other smaller entity than county level government. So, okay, go to your county commission and how agencies and regulations and process work in that context, or do not work in your own backyard, so to speak. Starting local is at least more realistic a possibility to be able to grok. That's a cool word, not invented by Elon Musk, of course, to grok what is happening, how it is happening, and perhaps why it is not happening when it should, or it should happen. It is happening when it should not. Cause and effect at local scale is still complicated, probably. It may be complex, but the actors are nearby. You can actually go talk to your mayor, your city council, people at different agencies. You can attend meetings, speak with people, maybe even gather a little crowd to make your voice louder, your questions more easily heard. So you can actually ask questions and get answers, and you can keep asking them without being shown a door. Usually, they may get fed up with you eventually, but even that will lead to more discovery if you play your cards correctly. You can go proactive, and this is the final point of the episode, so we're about to wrap it up. You can go proactive on any of this. Take a glance at the action suggestions in the Recoding America book website, which I linked to in the link section. As I mentioned earlier, we have our Innovate for Vegas Foundation here in Vegas, focused on civic volunteerism to elevate our local community. So sometimes that means taking a look at what is working and what is not. And is there some way that a volunteer group of people who live here, or who may be interested but don't live here, can say, that seems like something we could fix or make easier or make better. Getting others to participate is something of an uphill climb in general. That's the world we live in. But that hill exists, and that is a start, and you can do it too, wherever you live. And in fact, we have our Autonomous Cohort Transformation Initiative, which is aimed at trying to help people go from one person to, making things happen. So think about that. You can visit our innovateforvegas.org website, by the way, if I can plug my own nonprofit. Innovateforvegas.org. You can visit there for some more information. And while we're at it, project-act.info. That website is much more of a work in progress, but those are two areas that are focused on these things, generally speaking. Or you could run for office or engage more directly and specifically with agencies and organizations to learn what they do and how they do it. So you can do it as an elected member of your community, or you can, to public office, or you can just be more proactive and actually engage more directly and ask specific questions and become more directly involved. And you can form a nonprofit that isn't about civic volunteerism, but which is still about getting involved in these things and learning more about what happens and amplifying voices of dissent or even consent. And you can talk about it, write about it, engage your neighbors and community members, which is what we do with my Cafe Genius effort, but that's for another time. I will also point out that Innovate for Vegas Foundation does not focus on technology. So where Recoding America and Code for America and Alliance of Civic Technologists, and there's a host of other groups and organizations that are trying to talk technology. And I believe it's a little bit bigger than that. So not everything is code, not everything is tech. Those figure in more and more in different ways, but there's always room for dealing with human beings and human interfaces and experiences and how people consume and interact with their world as they see it, and so on and so on. So not everything is code, but certainly most things would benefit from involvement, awareness, curiosity, and maybe even some action. So in my view, Recoding Abundance, both of those books and probably many more, when they retell or lament the state of affairs, what they're really saying, whether they're advocating for it or not, what they're really saying is take the time to figure out what's going on and see if there's some way you can make it better. Whether it's actual direct action by you or being supportive of what others are doing, or at least knowing what you're talking about if you decide to talk about it, rather than saying it's my roof, my house, my problem. It's a little bit bigger than just you, but you should start by knowing that. And that is where we're going to leave today's episode. If you want to check out those books, they're not affiliate links. You can get the audiobooks. I think it's probably too early for Abundance to be in the library, but maybe. I think Recoding America might be in a library near you, or you can purchase them. You can get them as audiobooks. You can do a lot of things, but do endeavor to learn more about how these various programs, agencies, systems work and do not work, and then go from there. That's what I'm doing. Take care now, and thank you as always for listening. We'll catch up with you next week. Bye-bye.